Okay, this is the second part of the lecture for chapter 14. And again, as I mentioned before, take these in small chunks. Maybe don't go through it the whole time, um, but don't try to, again, go through the whole thing at the same time. But again, if you're at the last minute before the test, well, here you are, and we're starting from here. So, second order processes, as you can see there, this is the integrated version of the rate law, and it has the form of y equals mx plus b. Given some data, we can take a look and see how this goes together as far as our reaction. And looking at graphing this out, we take a look and see that this doesn't give us a straight line if I attempt to put it into the first or first order reaction rate law. So I put it into a natural log and I graph out the data versus time, and I get this graph that isn't straight. So nope, that reaction was not a first order process. So I take that same data sitting over here, and this time I use a second order process, graphing it together, take a look at it, and this time we notice that it is a straight line. So this confirms, this tells us that because it's a straight line, this is a second order process. So, backing up again, what does that tell us? Well, it tells us that if I double the concentration, or whatever factor, say double the concentration of a reactant, my rate will go up by 4-fold. So because of that factor of 2 that is being applied to that particular reactant. So it's a little bit complicated, absolutely. And it's going to take experience to kind of go through these and see several examples. We will do these in class. This is just an introduction and kind of going over the concepts through the PowerPoint. But most importantly, we'll have to see some examples of how this goes. All right, moving right along into half-life. Half-life, as you can see, is defined. It's the time needed to cut my reactant concentration by half. How long does that take? So here is my initial concentration. Here is my halfway point. The question is, how long does it take to get there? So this is specific to the type of reaction it is. Is it first order or is it second order? Well, let's take a look at a first order reaction. If we know that it is first order based on trials through experimentation, we have this setup where we have an initial concentration, and then we have our concentration after a period of time in which we now have half of that amount. If we take a look at the math process in here, we end up with canceling the a sub zeros out. It's the natural log of 0.5, which gives us this value here. One last little change is how long does it take? What is the half-life? It is simply the rate constant divided into 0.693. And again, where does 0.693 come from? It comes from natural log of 0.5. If we do this for a second order reaction, this time the initial concentration does matter. So we have to take a look at that, doing some math processes and some cancellations. We eventually end up with this as an equation for determining the time, the half-life it takes to get down to half of the original concentration for a second order reaction. We have to know that ahead of time. The first order is the second order. All right, done with that portion, looking at concentration and rate. Moving on. How does temperature affect the rate of a reaction? As you probably can imagine, as the temperature of a reaction goes up, the rate of the reaction goes up. So we can quickly ask why. Whoops, going back. And this is because as the particles have more energy, they have more effective collisions. So when they smash into each other, the particles, you're more likely to have an effective collision. Saying the same thing here. One of the analogies I like to use with this is if you have a bumper on your car, not too common to see those at least anymore, but if you're going to remove the bumper from a car in a collision, you would have to have two things happen at the same time. One is the two cars, would have to collide with enough energy to remove the bumper. And second, they would have to collide with the proper orientation. They'd have to hit each other just right in order to have that bumper removed. So both of those things have to go together. It's not quite stated here completely, but those are two things you would need for collision theory. Lately, at least this book calls it collision model. Same thing. And this kind of just goes into that same process. You can look at this on your own. Yep, same thing. I'd already stated all this. Activation energy, a new part. There's a graph we're going to see here in just a moment, and it's full of information. We'll see it here in just a moment. Here it is. You've seen these types of graphs several times, or at least I've shown them a few times anyways. You have an initial energy, potential energy, starting with our reactants, and we have a final energy for the products. And you have to get up some hill to have this reaction take place. The energy input, which is called the activation energy, the energy input gets us to a certain threshold. And once I get to here, it's kind of like pushing a ball to the top of the hill. The reaction can proceed on its own, but I have to add some energy. Even things that we think proceed spontaneously, sometimes there's the energy behind the scenes. Think of dynamite. You think it's completely exothermic, doesn't need any help. Well, somebody has to light a match. Somebody has to spark it in order for it to take place. So even with a stick of dynamite, which is very exothermic, there is some energy input into the system. Simply put, at the very end of this whole thing, when I'm looking at all these parts here, one of the things that really only matters is the change in energy. Is it endothermic or is it exothermic? And that is the difference between the starting energy and the final energy. Everything else is irrelevant to that final point. And here's some of that verbiage that's kind of just going along with that. Just to mention some of these different points here, we have this transition state, which is sitting up here, which is called the activated complex. At this point, this is where I've added enough energy into the system, getting from here up to here. Once I get up there, I am dismantling my reactants and reforming products. Again, the diagram is a model. It helps us kind of visualize this, but I provided enough energy, activation energy, into the system to break things apart and put things back together. Think of like taking your Legos and breaking apart all your old parts first. Therefore, then you can put them back together for the next project that you're putting together. Okay, Maxwell-Boltzmann. This little diagram we've seen earlier in the year, and what it tells us is as the temperature goes up, I have a larger percentage of particles that can react. Maybe not all of them. The average, no, they don't have enough energy, but a larger percentage of the particles do have enough energy. More of them will be able to react. And it states in here somewhere that as I increase the energy, this peak will flatten out, and the tail end of it will disproportionately start to broaden out over here, and I'll have a larger proportion of the particles that can react. The other thing I just mentioned, since this little line they're drawing in here, that's our activation energy. That is the threshold needed to break. Easy enough. We've stated all of this. All right, so now we have this nice little equation up here, which we're not going to deal with a whole lot, but there's a part of it that we do need to pay attention to. This whole fraction of the particles that is able to, or is now able to react, has everything to do with this one variable, the temperature. If I increase the temperature, as we're looking at this graph, it says, okay, increase temperature, larger fraction or a proportion of the particles can react. Well, go ahead and break out your calculator and fool around with the E button and take a look. That is this number, the temperature value goes up, this fraction, of course, will go down. It approaches 0. And if I plug those numbers into my calculator for E to the negative some number that's getting smaller along the way, you'll see that this number, or the fraction I should say, the answer to the fraction will approach 1 as 100%. So kind of probably somewhere in the 90%, 0.9 something. As the temperature goes up, my fraction becomes larger. We can take that little part you just saw and again integrate it, which we'll see here in just a moment. There we go. And we end up with a portion of the Arrhenius equation, which has the effect, as you can see, is y equals mx plus b. Even though we have this equation, there's actually another form, which I don't believe I have in the PowerPoint here, which we have to look at two different rate laws in comparison to two different temperatures. I don't think we mentioned it earlier, but remember the rate constant, I said rate law, the rate constant is dependent upon temperature. So it's constant at a temperature. So I have to look and say, well, what happens if I change this temperature? This Arrhenius equation takes that into account, looking at different temperatures. All right, this brand new topic, moving on. Mechanisms. For a mechanism, we're just looking at the different sequences, the different parts of a reaction. Just because I write a reaction doesn't mean it's one step. There could be several steps along the way that actually demonstrate how a reaction takes place. So what that's kind of telling us is it's not necessarily what it seems to be. What we see is not necessarily what it actually is. So I'm going to take a break here. We got 13 minutes into this lecture. That's plenty. So I will finish the third part up at another time.